Taking it back to a day where my memory falters a bit, faded away to photo images of an orange-colored tint. As a child, you'd run through greener fields, playing out visions of your dreams, thinking in tune, and imagination lived through days of many moons. You wanted to know, wanted to find, were able to live so carelessly, a certain innocence and thoughts to the potential you might be, a solid ground, a feeling of comfort from the love of a family tie, able to guide you, give you the strength to face the world and show you to fly. But then as you grow, but then as you see, but then you take a step away, time's so fleeting in only a minute, your life has changed without a say, and now you're standing more than alone, it seems you have to catch your breath. It's moving so quickly, only to grow, life has become an unquenchable test. As you get older and taken apart from the family which gave you your wings, and looking back and aching your heart tells you to cling on to these things, to give you the strength and the courage and assurance that all is okay, to think it was loved you, who's believed that you would succeed from the very first day. A family is not unlike an endless braid, each member adding their own thread of experience throughout their lives. And each thread is a palette of colors and intricacies created from all of the emotions and fluctuations experienced through everyday life. And all that is you, or makes your life worthy, means just as much as any other portion of this braid. To gain guidance as an individual or a strong meaning in your life, sometimes it takes looking into your history and recognizing more than just a genetic relation. Appreciating what those who have lived before you have endured can help guide anyone during their own life. So here I am, dissecting my own family braid. I know this won't necessarily give me all the answers to life, but it will give me more of an understanding for something beyond my own. And for me, that is motivation enough. In the late 19th century, there was change brewing around the world. Countries were thriving, developing, lacking, and changing. Many major world powers began to compete with one another for economic and territorial expansion. At that time, the small peninsula of Korea was lagging in its economic pace compared with the development of its neighboring countries, China, Japan, and Russia. It was these countries that therefore saw Korea's deficiency of modernization as a weakness they could potentially exploit. Leaders had thoughts of expanding territories and gaining more power, but it was ultimately Japan who determined to colonize Korea. They justified their occupation by stating that it was to aid in their industrial and agricultural expansion, increase the economic development of Korea, and provide direct land access into Manchuria. So in 1910, after strategically removing members of the Korean royal family, Japan invaded Korea and officially took it over. After the Japanese occupation, it became difficult for many Koreans to find work. The Japanese government took land from many Koreans to give to their immigrated Japanese citizens. Many Korean businesses were handed over to Japanese bureaucrats. Buildings were confiscated for military or governmental purposes. Most of the higher-paying jobs were not given to Koreans, even if they had beyond the necessary qualifications for the job. For the first 10 years, Japan ruled over Korea strictly through the military, punishing any dissent from protests or activists. The Japan rule was harsh, and many Koreans became less hopeful for their independence as time went on. On March 1st, 1919, 9 years after Japan took control of Korea, there was a nationwide Korean protest. After this March 1st protest, Japan rule eased up a bit, allowing some Korean publications and investment towards education. However, there was a distinct difference in the education for Korean children. Japanese schools emphasized studies which would lead to eventual university education, while Korean students had to learn about mere trades and blue-collar work. It was during this period in the 1920s, or more specifically 1926, when my grandpa, Pak Bum Hak, was born. Raised into a farming family as the second boy and last of 6 children, my grandpa was fortunate enough to get an education, unlike many Korean citizens at the time. But before my grandpa was old enough to get very far into his educated life, Japan altered its education policies, and in the 1930s it was mandated that all education be carried out in Japanese. The emphasis of this new Korean education policy was now to mold Korean citizens into faithful Japanese citizens. Somehow, the Japanese believed that by educating Koreans only about their culture, language, and history, they would successfully breed a new generation of Korean citizens dedicated to their cause. Dedicated citizens who wouldn't recognize being treated as second class. Dedicated citizens who had limited freedom in almost every regard. Dedicated citizens who would eventually be recruited to fight on the front line of their wars. So in light of Japan's demands, my grandpa learned to read, write, and speak in Japanese. Eventually, through a stroke of luck, he would be one of the few Korean students able to obtain an education beyond that of high school. In 1927, a year after my grandpa was born, and not too far from it, my grandma, Kim Pil-yun, took her first breath. She was the fifth of 8 children and also born into a Korean farming family. But not being nearly as fortunate as my grandpa during her youth, she was forced to attend an underground school to learn Korean. Even at an underground school, her teachers all spoke Japanese, and she couldn't even count in Korean until later on in her life. After being restricted with only a 2-year education, she would help her family farm until her parents matched her to marry my grandpa. Now stop for just a moment to think of a different time in which you wade through water fields and cultivate away your prime. There is an image of your life in the reflection of these fields, and if you look down at your hands, you see the wounds that never heal. You had to hope for best when you're feeling the worst and really want to find the good in all your hurts, and so you try to live just like you know you should, searching for a moment when you'll be understood. Now everything in your life reflects a humble existence. If you look back now, you see the meaning within this. But just right now, it seems so hard to find a voice with all these perceptions of your values being wrong, inferring moral direction. So you try not to desire what you cannot attain, regardless of the dreams which you wish to sustain. As another decade passed, there was blood to be shed around the world. In 1937, Japan launched a full-scale invasion of China, and in 1939, World War II officially began, with alliances between the USA, USSR, Great Britain, China, and France against Germany, Italy, and Japan. The war progressed, and it wasn't long before Japan decided to increase their internal defenses. It was mandated that all Koreans permanently obtain Japanese last names. The Japanese government sent military officials to collect necessary ammunition from their patrons, requiring them to give up every last bit of brass and metal. Many Korean citizens who were capable were either drafted into the war and put on the front line, or had to work in dangerous slave-like conditions in factories. The Japanese government hired thousands of Korean comfort women during World War II, rounding up women from urban areas and villages to use as sex slaves on the front line of their battles. They advocated that it would increase the morale of their fighting men. And as the Japanese government began to perceive their Korean citizens as an increasing threat, many Koreans could only further embed their animosity towards the Japanese. My grandparents were teenagers during this time, adolescents who could only sustain a hope that fate would take mercy on their country and people. In 1945, World War II ended, taking 52,199,252 lives worldwide. After its defeat, Japan surrendered, and Korea was suddenly liberated. Japanese soldiers and patrons fled the peninsula immediately after their defeat, fearing backlash from their former Korean citizens, and for the first time, my grandma saw her family and neighbors outwardly joyous, outwardly able to speak their native tongue and use their Korean names again. Koreans came out to the streets and began singing. They were singing a song she had never heard before, and it would be years later that she came to find out that they were singing the Korean national anthem, a song some thought lost. Right after the celebration of their liberation, Korea was swept into a state of utter chaos, With no form of government and the immediate influence of the United States in the south and the Soviet Union in the north, an armistice was signed, and in 1953, Korea was split at the 38th parallel. Eventually, this would prove to be much more than a separation of country, because the North and South's political influences and power-hungry leaders polarized both sides to such an extent that they seemed to overlook the unity from within. It was in the midst of this chaos that my grandparents met and married. They built their home in a small village outside of Daegu. The foundation they laid during this time would prove to be unyielding. On Korea's horizon, there was another black cloud of conflict emerging. Political contention was continuously growing between South and North Korea. North Koreans were backed up by the Soviet Union and therefore sustained a communistic stance, while the United States influenced South Korea with a capitalistic opposition. In 1950, the Korean Civil War began. The same year, my grandmother bore her first child, my eldest aunt, Pak Sok-hee. At 22, my grandpa had become a teacher and well-respected mentor of their humble village. However, his higher level of education also made him a target when the North Koreans invaded the South. He was forced to flee into the mountains with other men in his village to avoid being taken prisoner. During the days, the North Korean troops would stand watch over the village, and at nights, my grandma would have to sneak out into the mountains to bring my grandpa food. He survived many months enduring these hostile circumstances until the North Korean troops eventually retreated. The Korean Civil War lasted 3 years, ending July of 1953, but not before taking the lives of over 3 million Koreans, 1 million Chinese, and about 54,000 Americans. And after all those years of endless battles, Korea ended only in a truce, and to this day it is still split at the 38th parallel, and still opposed at politically antagonistic ends.
Well, he said that everything felt like death, and I can't help. Well, this moves my heart to try and understand. After death, what this world is left for my shaking hand, and we breathe through the pain. Our lungs slowly fill with hopes of a brighter day.
In 1958, my mother, Pak Il-suk, was born as the middle of 7 children. After the Korean Civil War, the South struggled to adopt methods of modernization, so during all her years in elementary, my mom and her sisters would study adamantly in the wake of candlelight. Their internal heat consisted of burning wood in a fire pit connected beneath her house, and she had to walk to the city in order to see most forms of transportation. It wasn't until my mother was in junior high that they got electricity, and she was able to experience technological advancement. Pak Jung-hee presided over South Korea after the Korean Civil War, from 1961 to 1979. In 1962, he put into action the 5-year economic plan, focusing on reconstructing the economy and emphasizing industrial modernization. The United States' influence reinforced the focus of modernization, putting billions of dollars into aiding the Korean economy. In 1980, my mom met my dad, serving in a restaurant just off a U.S. military base in Daegu. A year later, they married, and it would only be a few months after that my mom left her entire world to start her own family in America. With American military bases still active in Korea today, the United States would quite naturally influence Korea in more ways than politically. Of course, like most success stories, this one wasn't developed purely from sugar and spice. Working conditions were harsh, especially in factories, with little or no safety precautions taken for their workers. Korea retained its historically patriarchal society, and it took years of reform to finally give women a pervasive voice. There were, and still are, many open wounds for Korean citizens, rooted in their years of colonization, civil war, and for many years after their independence. About 2 years after I started college, I got a call from my mom. She told me my grandpa had passed away, and while she flew back to Korea to be at his funeral, I sat in my dorm room with a streak of emptiness in my heart. As time passed, I realized this void stemmed from my regrets of not getting to know him, of how I still hadn't gotten to know my grandma, my grandparents who had seen so much, experienced firsthand the tribulations of living in a world so beyond my own comprehension. Korea currently has the 10th largest economy in the world, and the 3rd largest in Asia. It is the world's 7th largest goods exporter. In 2005, it was estimated that Korea had 48 million citizens, with an unemployment rate of only 3.5%. Currently, Korea has the highest per capita broadband penetration in the world. Technology has spread rampant in all corners of the small peninsula. In the last 100 years, Korea's development has been something of a miracle story, but their success has not come without a history filled with tragedy and a long, tumultuous road to get there. A knowledge of history is more than just knowing who lived before you. It is the history of a time and place in the world, a history of those you have loved or do. It is all the experiences and emotions of anyone and any time. It is your history.